Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks for joining in and thanks for your support. One night around 8 years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night in my bed and I was crying. Um, I must have been crying while dreaming, and perhaps the intensity of the dream is what woke me up. In the beginning, I did not understand what was going on, but after a few moments, I could recall the dream that I just had. And in that dream, I just met my grandfather who had been dead for 10 years. I loved my grandfather, and I still do. His name is Farid, which translates to unique in Arabic. He spent his life serving in the military. And when he retired, he spent his mornings taking care of the land that he owned in the mountains and his afternoons managing a small grocery store that he had established. Well, owning a grocery store meant free chocolate for his grandson. My memories and my memories with him are very precious to me. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I would go over to my grandparents' house and spend the weekend. He would wake me up around 5 a.m. to go take care of this field of olive trees that he owned. He would chop down dead branches, pull out the weed, fix the stone walls, and then hours later, we would carry all the wood back to his car. And I still remember that car. It smelled like olive tree wood. He drove a small Volkswagen Beetle, Herbie's Lebanese cousin. And that car had a damaged roof, and people would joke with him and say, Farid, did you have a car accident with God? Actually, he damaged the roof because he accidentally drove off a small cliff one day, and the car landed upside down, but he was okay. Um, and then I remember like I started going to school. I had to worry about homeworks. Life got more serious. I had to worry about, after school activities, about my grades. And the more serious life became, the more I drifted away from my grandfather. I remember at some point I didn't even like the chocolate, the free chocolate that he offered me. So I stopped going to his store and I started going to another store. I was growing up and he was getting old and we were becoming strangers. I mean, we all have our teenage struggles, and mine was to reject everything and everyone around me to create a distance. And perhaps from a distance, you're able to explain things better. At least that's what I thought. I wasn't raised religious, and when you don't have a God around you, I think you tend to create and be your own God, just to be able to tell what's right and what's wrong, um, what's ethical and what's not. And I found refuge in science. Science can explain and will eventually explain everything, I said to myself. But the science that I understood, it taught me weird things like my mom and my dad are just random human beings who gave me life, or emotions are just chemical reactions in the brain, and they are just an illusion. So I avoided emotions, especially strong ones, like my love for my grandfather. When I was 15, he was 91, and he was starting to get really sick. His excessive smoking started to catch up with him, and he was coughing a lot. So when I would visit my grandparents, I could hear him in his room coughing. But as a cowardly teenager, I was, I'd never went and greeted him. I distanced myself from him and his sickness. Um, it's just like I said to myself, like, oh, didn't he know that smoking is bad for him? Um, don't we suffer the consequences of our actions? And soon after, I was getting ready for school one day, and my sister walks into the living room and she says, Grandpa passed away. Well, she was crying, but I was unmoved. And to this day, I still do not understand how I had the power to be completely numb, not to feel anything. So she looked at me and she said, "You are a heartless jerk." And she left. So I go to the funeral, I see everyone crying because he was such a nice person. It was the first time I see my dad and my uncles crying. Um, and then I leave the funeral and I turn the page. I thought, so 10 years after, I was living in Evanston, Illinois, attending grad school. And this is when I woke up in the middle of the night crying. And in that dream, I was in this very crowded train station. It was very futuristic and modern, yet, it was busy, but also clean and bright. I was sitting down and I was looking around and I saw this old, charming man standing next to me. So I moved my stuff for him to sit down, and he did. I smiled at him, and he smiled back. His face looked so familiar, so the more I looked into his face, the more I drifted away from the train station and from the dream. And in a heartbeat, what remained was his face, and uh, my smile started to turn into a pour of tears because I realized then that I had just met my grandfather. I woke up crying, but it was followed by a heavenly relief, like a storm, like a calm after the storm. Um, I was so grateful that I met him again. Um, it felt like I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Um, I held up my tears for 10 years, so it was time for me uh, to cry and mourn his death. I actually felt very, very guilty for not being by his side when he was sick. So this time in my dream, unlike the last time I met him in real life, I was kind and warm towards him. And I'm so glad that I got it right this time. I could try, at least try, finally to forgive myself. Thank you guys for listening.